The motion sensors triggered at 2:47 a.m., sending alerts directly to 3 different federal databases before my phone even buzzed. Red infrared beams crisscrossed the barn's interior like a laser light show, capturing every movement of the figure in expensive yoga pants and a designer jacket wielding a crowbar against my rescue horse's feed bins. Karen Pemberton, president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association, had just committed her first federal crime of the night. She wouldn't stop there. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've been running the Second Chance Ranch for wounded veterans and rescue animals for 3 years now. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, despite her obsessive research into every property owner in our community, was that my ranch sits on a unique piece of land. Federal land. Bureau of Land Management property, leased specifically for veteran rehabilitation programs under the Disabled Veterans Outreach Act. The government takes trespassing on federal property very seriously. They take destruction of federal property even more seriously, and breaking and entering onto federal property while committing additional crimes. That's what we call a career-ending decision. 3 weeks earlier, I had been living my quiet routine. Dawn broke over the mountain ridge as I filled water troughs for the horses. Jasper, a thoroughbred rescued from a racing track, nuzzled my shoulder while I worked. The morning air carried the scent of pine and fresh hay, the kind of peace that made every difficult decision worth it. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor Tom. "Karen's asking questions about your property lines again. Thought you should know." Karen Pemberton had made herself the unofficial sheriff of Pine Ridge, a gated community that bordered my ranch. She drove a white Range Rover with custom license plates reading "Ho Queen" and treated every community meeting like a board meeting where she was the CEO. Her perfectly manicured lawn and surgically enhanced smile masked a personality that could freeze water in July. I'd dealt with her complaints before. The horses made too much noise at dawn. The rescue dogs barked during thunderstorms. The veterans who came for therapy sessions parked their trucks on the road, which she claimed violated some obscure aesthetic clause in the HOA bylaws. Never mind that my property wasn't even part of the HOA. That afternoon, she appeared at my gate like a storm cloud in Lululemon. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her blue eyes had the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. "We need to talk," she announced, not waiting for an invitation to step onto my property. "About what, Karen?" "About this." She waved a manila folder, thick with documents. "I've been researching your little operation here, and I think you'll find there are some serious compliance issues." She spread papers across my porch table like a lawyer preparing for cross-examination. Zoning regulations, business licenses, animal welfare codes. Everything was highlighted in yellow and annotated with her spidery handwriting. "This is private property," I said, keeping my voice level. "Private property that's operating an unlicensed business," she shot back. "These therapy sessions you're running, you're taking money from people without proper certification. The animals you're keeping, some of them aren't registered with the county. And don't get me started on the traffic violations." I gathered the papers and handed them back to her. "You're right about one thing. This is private property. You need to leave." Her smile turned razor sharp. "Oh, Marcus, you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've shut down 3 illegal businesses in this community. I've had property owners fined, sanctioned, and forced to sell. You're not special." "We'll see about that." She climbed back into her Range Rover, but not before delivering one final threat. "You have 72 hours to cease operations. After that, I'm calling every regulatory agency in the state." The next morning, I woke to find official-looking notices taped to my gate. Cease and desist orders from the Department of Agriculture. Violation warnings from Animal Control. Business licensing citations from the county clerk. Karen had been busy. I called my lawyer, James Morrison, a veteran himself who'd helped me navigate the paperwork when I first established the ranch. His voice was grim when he called back. "She's filed complaints with 6 different agencies," he said. "Most of them are frivolous, but they'll require responses, court appearances. This could tie you up for months." "Can she do that?" "Unfortunately, yes. The system assumes good faith reporting. But Marcus, there's something else. She's also filed a civil suit claiming your property is lowering values in the neighborhood. She's seeking an injunction to shut down all operations immediately." My blood ran cold. Can she win? With the right judge and enough legal pressure. Maybe. But there's something you need to know. I've been digging into your property deed, and there's a detail you might have missed when you inherited the land from your grandfather. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of detail? The kind that changes everything. Your property isn't just private land, Marcus. It's federal land under a special use permit. Your grandfather had a unique agreement with the Bureau of Land Management, and that agreement transferred to you. Karen isn't just harassing a private citizen. She's interfering with federal operations. The implications hit me like a freight train. You mean? I mean every document she's filed, every complaint she's made, every threat she's issued could be considered federal harassment. And if she takes any direct action against your property, she'll be committing federal crimes. That evening, I installed additional security cameras around the barn and main buildings. Something told me Karen wouldn't be satisfied with legal paperwork for long. 2 days later, my instincts proved correct. I was in town picking up feed supplies when my phone erupted with notifications, motion detectors, perimeter alarms, camera alerts. Someone was on my property. I called the sheriff's department while speeding back to the ranch. "This is Marcus Chen at Second Chance Ranch. Someone's breaking into my property." "We'll send a unit out," the dispatcher said. "ETA 15 minutes. I made it home in 12. Karen's Range Rover was parked brazenly in my driveway, headlights still on. The barn door stood open, and I could hear the sound of metal on metal echoing across the property. She was inside my barn, crowbar in hand, prying open feed bins and equipment lockers, horse feed scattered across the concrete floor like expensive confetti. Jasper and the other horses whinnied in distress from their stalls. "What the hell are you doing?" She spun around, crowbar raised defensively. "I'm conducting a citizen's inspection. I have every right to document health code violations." "You're trespassing. You're destroying private property. And you're scaring the animals." "Private property." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I did my research. Marcus, this land isn't even properly zoned. You're squatting on undeveloped county land, and I'm going to prove it." Red and blue lights began flashing outside. The sheriff's department had arrived. Deputy Rodriguez entered the barn with his hand resting on his service weapon. "Everyone step back. What's the situation here?" Karen immediately switched tactics, dropping the crowbar and assuming the posture of a concerned citizen. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. I came to check on reports of animal neglect, and this man became violent when I tried to document the conditions." "That's not what happened," I said, but Karen was already in full performance mode. "I have witnesses who can testify to the noise complaints, the traffic violations, the unlicensed business operations. This man is running an illegal operation, and when I tried to gather evidence, he threatened me. Deputy Rodriguez looked between us, clearly trying to process the situation. Ma'am, did you have permission to be on this property? I don't need permission to document public health violations, Karen replied smoothly. This is a public safety issue. Actually, you do need permission, the deputy said. This is private property, and what you're describing sounds like breaking and entering. Karen's confidence wavered for just a moment. I think you'll find that this property's legal status is more complicated than it appears. I've done extensive research. What kind of research? She pulled out her phone, scrolling through documents. Property records, zoning classifications, business licenses. This man is operating outside the law, and I'm simply exercising my rights as a concerned citizen. Deputy Rodriguez turned to me. Sir, do you have documentation proving ownership of this property? I handed him the deed and federal permits. His expression changed as he read through them, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. Ma'am, you need to step outside immediately. Excuse me. This property is under federal jurisdiction. You're trespassing on federal land. Karen's perfect composure finally cracked. That's impossible. I researched this property extensively. There's no federal designation. There is now, Deputy Rodriguez said firmly, and I need to call this in immediately. He stepped outside to radio his dispatcher, while Karen and I stood in uncomfortable silence among the scattered horse feed. The weight of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. This changes nothing, Karen said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. I still have documentation of violations. No, Karen, this changes everything. Deputy Rodriguez returned with a grim expression. Ma'am, I need you to remain here. Federal agents are en route. Federal agents. Karen's voice rose an octave. For what? Breaking and entering onto federal property. Destruction of federal property. Interference with federal operations. He looked at the scattered feed and damaged equipment. And possibly more charges depending on what the agents find. Karen's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. I need to make a call. You can make your call when the federal agents arrive. Deputy Rodriguez said, For now, you need to remain on the property. 30 minutes later, 3 black SUVs pulled into my driveway. Federal agents in suits and FBI windbreakers emerged like a small army. Special Agent Diana Torres, a no-nonsense woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, took charge of the scene. Mr. Chen, I'm Agent Torres with the FBI. We understand there's been an incident on federal property. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Pemberton broke into my barn and destroyed equipment. Agent Torres turned to Karen, who was trying to maintain her composure, but failing badly. Ms. Pemberton, I need you to understand the seriousness of what's happened here. You've committed multiple federal crimes. I was documenting health code violations, Karen said weakly. I had no idea this was federal property. Ignorance of the law isn't a defense, Agent Torres replied. But let's start with what you do know. Why were you on this property? Karen launched into her prepared speech about community standards, property values, and unlicensed businesses. With each word, she dug herself deeper into legal quicksand. So you admit to conducting surveillance on federal property? I was protecting my community. And you admit to filing false complaints with federal agencies. They weren't false. I documented violations. Did you attempt to coerce Mr. Chen into ceasing operations? I gave him notice of violations. Agent Torres exchanged glances with her colleagues. Ms. Pemberton, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The Miranda warning hit Karen like a physical blow. You're arresting me. You're under arrest for multiple federal charges, including trespassing on federal property, destruction of federal property, filing false reports with federal agencies, harassment of federal operations, and conspiracy to interfere with federal programs. The handcuffs clicked around Karen's wrists with a finality that echoed across the property. Her designer jacket and perfect makeup couldn't hide the reality that she was now a federal prisoner. This is a mistake, she said as agents led her to one of the black SUVs. I'm the president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. I have connections. I have lawyers. You'll need them, Agent Torres said simply. As the SUVs drove away with Karen in custody, I stood in my barn, surrounded by scattered feed and broken equipment. The horses had finally calmed down, but I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through my system. Deputy Rodriguez helped me document the damage for the federal report. How long do you think she'll be in custody? Federal charges, she's looking at years, not months, he replied. And that's if she pleads guilty and cooperates. The next morning, local news vans lined the road outside my gate. The story had exploded across social media. HOA president arrested by FBI for breaking into federal property. Karen's mugshot, showing her designer jacket and shocked expression, became an instant internet sensation. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, but I referred them all to my lawyer. The last thing I wanted was to turn this into a media circus. However, the story had legs. Within 48 hours, investigative journalists began digging into Karen's background and her activities as HOA president. What they found was a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and questionable financial practices that stretched back years. The first bombshell came from Channel 7 News. Reporter Sarah Williams had obtained financial records showing that Karen had been embezzling HOA funds for personal expenses, designer clothes, luxury vacations, and her Range Rover had all been purchased with homeowner association money. Our investigation reveals that Karen Pemberton, now facing federal charges, may have stolen over $200,000 from the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. Williams reported, "We've obtained bank records showing regular transfers from HOA accounts to her personal accounts, with many transactions labeled as community enhancement expenses." The second bombshell came from the FBI themselves. During their investigation of the ranch incident, agents had discovered that Karen had been filing false reports with multiple federal agencies for years, not just about my property, but about dozens of businesses and properties throughout the county. Agent Torres held a press conference 3 days after Karen's arrest. Ms. Pemberton appears to have been using federal agencies as weapons against private citizens, she announced. We've identified at least 37 separate instances where she filed false or misleading reports with federal agencies, costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in investigation costs. The third bombshell was the most personal. Tom, my neighbor who'd been texting me warnings about Karen's activities, came forward with a recording he'd made of their conversation 2 weeks earlier. I've been documenting everything. Karen's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Every violation, every infraction, every way that ranch is bringing down our property values. I'm going to destroy him piece by piece until he has no choice but to sell. Karen, the man's helping veterans. Tom's voice responded, Maybe you should leave it alone. Veterans don't pay my mortgage. Tom, property values do, and that ranch is costing me money every day it operates. The recording went viral within hours. Karen's own words, spoken in her own voice, revealed the true motivation behind her harassment campaign. It wasn't about community standards or legal violations. It was about money. The Pine Ridge Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting for the following Saturday. I wasn't a member, but several homeowners invited me to attend as their guest. They wanted to hear my side of the story directly. The community center was packed beyond capacity. Nearly 200 residents crowded into a space designed for 75. The anger in the room was palpable, but it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at Karen and the board members who had enabled her behavior. Bob Harrison, the HOA vice president, called the meeting to order. We're here tonight to address the charges against our president and to discuss the future of our community. Margaret Foster, a retired teacher who'd lived in Pine Ridge for 20 years, stood up immediately. I want to know how Karen Pemberton was able to steal $200,000 from our association without anyone noticing. The treasurer, David Kim, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The board relied on Karen's financial reports. She presented detailed budgets and expense reports at every meeting. Fake reports, Margaret shot back. She was buying designer clothes with our money while claiming it was for community enhancement. Another voice called out from the back, What about all the harassment? How many people did she target with false complaints? Bob looked at me. Mr. Chen, would you be willing to share your experience with the community? I stood and faced the crowd. Karen targeted my ranch because she believed it was lowering property values. She filed false complaints with 6 different agencies, threatened to shut down my veteran therapy programs, and ultimately broke into my barn to manufacture evidence of violations. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Tom stood up. She wasn't just targeting Marcus. She's been harassing residents for years. Anyone who didn't keep their lawn perfect. Anyone who had guests park on the street. Anyone who didn't follow her vision of what the neighborhood should look like. More voices joined in. Stories of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power poured out like water from a broken dam. Karen had created a climate of fear in Pine Ridge, where residents lived in constant worry about violating some obscure HOA rule. She fined me $500 for having a garden gnome. One elderly man called out, said it violated the aesthetic standards. She tried to have my daughter's car towed because it was 5 years old. Another resident added, said it was an eyesore. The stories continued for over an hour. A pattern emerged of systematic harassment, financial exploitation, and abuse of authority that had been building for years. Karen hadn't just committed crimes against federal property. She'd committed crimes against her own community. Bob Harrison called for order. It's clear that we need to take immediate action. I motion to remove Karen Pemberton from the position of HOA president immediately. The motion was seconded and passed unanimously. Not a single voice spoke in Karen's defense. Margaret Foster stood again. I also motion that we immediately hire an independent auditor to review all financial records and determine the full extent of the embezzlement. That motion also passed unanimously. David Kim, the treasurer, raised his hand. I think we should also consider dissolving the current board and holding new elections. We all failed to provide proper oversight. The third unanimous vote of the evening. As the meeting wound down, residents approached me one by one to apologize for Karen's behavior and to thank me for my work with veterans. Several asked if their own adult children, who were struggling with PTSD, could participate in the therapy programs. Tom shook my hand firmly. "I'm sorry we didn't speak up sooner. She had everyone intimidated." "It's not your fault," I replied. "She was systematic about it. Divide and conquer." Margaret Foster hugged me before leaving. "That ranch of yours is a blessing to this community. Don't let one bad person make you think otherwise." 3 weeks later, Karen's preliminary hearing was held in federal court. I attended along with Agent Torres and Deputy Rodriguez. Karen's lawyer, an expensive-looking man in a $1,000 suit, tried to argue that his client was a victim of overzealous federal prosecution. "Your Honor, Ms. Pemberton is a pillar of her community," he argued. "She was simply trying to protect property values and ensure compliance with local regulations." Assistant Federal Prosecutor Maria Santos stood to respond. "Your Honor, the defendant's actions were part of a systematic pattern of harassment and abuse of federal processes. She filed false reports with federal agencies 37 times over 4 years, costing taxpayers over $300,000 in investigation costs. She broke into federal property and destroyed federal equipment while attempting to manufacture evidence. This isn't community activism. This is criminal behavior." The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and no patience for legal theatrics, reviewed the evidence quickly. "Ms. Pemberton, you're charged with 5 federal felonies. How do you plead?" Karen's lawyer whispered in her ear for several minutes. Her perfect composure had completely cracked. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept in days. Her designer clothes hung loose on her frame. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge set bail at $100,000 and scheduled a trial date for 6 months later. Karen would remain free pending trial, but under strict conditions. She was forbidden from contacting any residents of Pine Ridge, from filing any reports with federal agencies, and from coming within 500 feet of my ranch. As we left the courthouse, Agent Torres filled me in on the continuing investigation. "We've identified 43 separate incidents where she filed false reports. The financial crimes investigation is ongoing, but we expect additional charges." "What's the likelihood of conviction?" "With the evidence we have, near certainty. Her own recorded conversations, the video footage from your barn, the financial records, the pattern of false reports. She's going to prison." 4 months later, Karen changed her plea to guilty. Her lawyer had apparently convinced her that fighting the charges would only result in a longer sentence. The sentencing hearing was held on a cold December morning. Karen entered the courtroom, looking like a shadow of her former self. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. She wore a simple black dress and had aged years in the few months since her arrest. Judge Morrison addressed her directly. "Ms. Pemberton, you've pleaded guilty to 5 federal felonies. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say?" Karen stood with her lawyer's help. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to Mr. Chen and to the residents of Pine Ridge. I let my desire to protect property values cloud my judgment. I never intended to commit federal crimes." The judge wasn't impressed. "Ms. Pemberton, the evidence shows a systematic pattern of harassment and abuse that lasted for years. You didn't make a mistake. You made dozens of calculated decisions to harm others for your own benefit." She sentenced Karen to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay $387,000 in restitution to the government and to the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. As the marshals led Karen away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but I couldn't help feeling sorry for someone who had destroyed her own life through arrogance and greed. The aftermath of Karen's conviction brought unexpected changes to both my ranch and the Pine Ridge community. The new HOA board, led by Margaret Foster as president, reached out to establish a partnership with my veteran therapy programs. They voted to allow their community center to be used for group therapy sessions during bad weather. Property values in Pine Ridge actually increased after Karen's removal. The climate of fear she had created was replaced by a sense of community cooperation. Neighbors began talking to each other again, instead of watching for violations to report. My ranch expanded as well. The publicity from the case brought in donations from across the country. Veterans organizations, animal welfare groups, and private donors contributed enough money to build a new therapy center and expand the horse rescue program. Agent Torres visited 6 months after Karen's sentencing. "How are things going, Mr. Chen?" "Better than I ever imagined," I replied. "We're helping twice as many veterans now, and the community has become genuinely supportive." Good. Karen's case has become a training example for us. We use it to teach new agents about the importance of investigating harassment complaints thoroughly. Tom stopped by that evening with a bottle of wine and news from Pine Ridge. "Margaret wants to know if you'd consider joining the HOA board. They're creating a new position for community outreach." I laughed. "After everything that happened, you want me to join the HOA?" "Things are different now. Karen's gone. The stolen money has been recovered, and the community wants to rebuild. You'd be perfect for helping to establish better relationships with surrounding properties." I considered it while we sat on my porch, watching the horses graze in the evening light. Jasper trotted over to the fence, hoping for treats and attention. "You know what I think I'd like that." 2 years later, I stood in the same barn where Karen had committed her federal crimes. It had been renovated and expanded, with new stalls for rescue horses and a climate-controlled area for therapy sessions. The walls were covered with thank you letters from veterans who had found healing through our programs. A group of visitors from the Department of Veterans Affairs was touring the facility. They were considering expanding federal funding for similar programs nationwide. "The key to our success," I explained to the group, "is community support. When neighbors work together instead of against each other, amazing things can happen." Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the VA's regional director, nodded approvingly. "We've read about the challenges you faced in establishing this program. How did you overcome the opposition?" "Sometimes the system works exactly as it should," I replied. "When someone abuses their power to harm others, the consequences catch up with them. In Karen's case, her own actions brought federal attention to her crimes." Margaret Foster, now a close friend and collaborative partner, joined us for the conclusion of the tour. "Marcus is being modest. He stood up to harassment and intimidation when it would have been easier to give up. That courage inspired the rest of us to stand up as well." As the VA officials departed, I remained in the barn with Margaret. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the clean straw and well-maintained equipment. "Do you ever regret how everything played out?" Margaret asked. I considered the question carefully. I regret that Karen felt she had to resort to crimes to get her way. I regret that the community lived in fear for so long. But I don't regret fighting back. Some things are worth defending. That evening, I received a call from Agent Torres. "Marcus, I have some news about Karen.
What kind of news?
She's been released to a halfway house. She'll be on supervised probation for the next 2 years, but she's served her prison time. I felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Is she planning to return to the area? No. The terms of her probation require her to stay at least 100 miles away from Pine Ridge. She's relocated to another state and is working at a nonprofit organization. Good for her. Everyone deserves a second chance. That's very generous of you, considering what she put you through. Holding on to anger would only hurt me. She paid her debt to society. I hope she's learned from her mistakes. After hanging up, I walked out to the pasture where the horses were settling in for the night. Jasper approached the fence, and I scratched his forehead while he nuzzled my jacket pocket for treats. The ranch had become more than I ever imagined when I first inherited the property. It was a place of healing, not just for the veterans who came for therapy, but for the entire community. Karen's crimes had inadvertently brought people together in ways that years of normal interaction never could have. 3 years after Karen's arrest, Pine Ridge had become a model for successful homeowner associations. They hosted annual conferences on community building and conflict resolution. Margaret Foster had written a book about transforming toxic leadership into collaborative governance. My ranch had received federal recognition as a center of excellence for veteran therapy programs. We'd helped over 200 veterans work through trauma and transition challenges. The rescue program had saved and rehabilitated 43 horses. The old motion sensors still monitored the barn, but now they were connected to a visitor welcome system instead of a security alert system. People came from across the country to learn about our programs and to see how federal, state, and local resources could work together effectively. On the 5th anniversary of Karen's arrest, the Pine Ridge community held a celebration called Unity Day. It was designed to commemorate the community's recovery and to celebrate the partnerships that had emerged from the crisis. I was invited to speak at the event, along with Margaret Foster, Agent Torres, and Deputy Rodriguez. The community center was packed again, but this time with laughter and celebration instead of anger and fear. 5 years ago, this community faced a crisis. I began my speech. One person's abuse of power had created an atmosphere of fear and division. But that crisis also revealed the strength and character of this community. When people are given the chance to work together instead of against each other, they can accomplish incredible things. The applause was warm and genuine. After the formal presentations, residents mingled and shared stories of positive changes in their lives and neighborhoods. Children played games on the community center lawn, while their parents planned collaborative projects. Tom approached me with a newspaper clipping. "Did you see this? It's about Karen." The article was from a small newspaper in Oregon. Karen was working as a program coordinator for a nonprofit that provided legal aid to low-income families. The article described her as a dedicated advocate who had overcome personal challenges to help others. "She's found her second chance," I said. "Are you okay with that?" I thought about the question while watching the celebration around us. Children laughed as they played games that would have been forbidden under Karen's strict interpretation of community standards. Neighbors talked freely about their lives and dreams, without fear of reporting or retaliation. "I'm more than okay with it," I replied. "I'm proud of it. This whole experience taught me that justice isn't about punishment. It's about healing and growth. Karen needed to face consequences for her actions, but she also deserved the chance to become a better person." As the celebration wound down, I stood in the parking lot, saying goodbye to friends and neighbors. The ranch had become the heart of a community that extended far beyond property lines or HOA boundaries. Margaret Foster hugged me before leaving. "Thank you for not giving up, Marcus. None of this would have been possible if you had let Karen intimidate you into closing the ranch. Thank you for creating a community worth defending." That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening quiet. Horses snorted softly in their stalls. The rescue dogs dozed in their kennels. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers across the property. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Chen, my name is Sarah. I'm a veteran who just moved to the area. I heard about your therapy programs. Would it be possible to visit next week?" I typed back quickly, "Of course. We'd love to meet you. The ranch is always open to veterans who need support." The circle continued. New people finding healing, new partnerships forming, new hope growing from the ashes of old conflicts. Karen's attempt to destroy the ranch had ultimately made it stronger and more impactful than I ever imagined possible. The motion sensors in the barn were still active, but now they welcomed visitors instead of catching intruders. The federal protection that had saved the ranch from Karen's crimes continued to provide security for the expanding programs. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 5 years ago, I had been a target of harassment and intimidation. Today, I was part of a thriving community that had learned to turn conflict into cooperation. The ranch would continue to grow and serve veterans who needed healing. The community would continue to work together on projects that benefited everyone. And somewhere in Oregon, Karen would continue her own journey of redemption and service. Justice had been served, but more importantly, grace had been extended. The federal crimes that had brought Karen down had also lifted up everyone around her. Sometimes the most painful conflicts create the most beautiful outcomes. The next morning, I woke to the sound of horses whinnying their breakfast requests. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Another day of healing, growth, and community was beginning. As I filled the water troughs and distributed hay, I thought about the text message from Sarah, the veteran who would be visiting next week. She would find the same peace and healing that dozens of others had found here. The ranch would continue to fulfill its mission, protected by federal law and supported by community partnership. Karen's break-in had been intended to destroy what we were building. Instead, it had revealed the strength of our foundation and the power of standing up for what's right. The federal charges that had ended her reign of harassment had also secured the future of everything she had tried to destroy. In the end, the barn where she had committed her crimes had become a symbol of resilience and recovery. The motion sensors that had captured her illegal actions now welcomed visitors from across the country. The federal protection she had inadvertently triggered continued to safeguard the programs that were changing lives. I smiled as Jasper trotted over for his morning treats. It was going to be a beautiful day at Second Chance Ranch, where broken things found healing and second chances became new beginnings.